What role can cities play in helping more of our young adults find pathways to success? And we have an outstanding panel here to address that. The panel is going to be moderated by Scott Smith. Scott was the mayor of Mesa, Arizona for quite a while, but he was also president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And he recently completed a term of study at Harvard's Kennedy School. So he really brings a national perspective to the issue of what cities can do. Joining him on the panel are, first of all, Sarah Roberts. She comes from Ogden, Utah. Believe it or not, Ogden was recently ranked as the #1 city in the United States in terms of the lowest level of income inequality. So they're doing some pretty amazing things in Ogden. She's going to tell us about that. Then we have Paul Koehler. Paul is the Senior Program Director of the Policy Center at WestEd, and more relevant for this, he helped organize the Arizona Conference of Mayors Education Roundtable. He's been working with them on the issue particularly of opportunity youth and what impact mayors can have in addressing that. Sitting to the my far right is Neil Giuliano. He's the CEO of Greater Phoenix Leadership, which is the major CEO business group here in Phoenix, but he was also mayor of Tempe, Arizona for 10 years. So he brings perspective both from the viewpoint of mayors as well as the role of the business community. And here we have a speaker who's not listed in your program, Kenny Evans, who is the mayor of Payson, Arizona, and he's going to bring the perspective of how can rural mayors deal with this. And a lot of our sessions have focused on how do we address the Pathways Challenge in rural areas of the West. And he's going to be speaking to that. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Scott Smith.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, and good morning to everybody. There we go. Well, let's try, every time you do this, you have to do it twice. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Hope all of you are now wide awake, and if you're from out of state, welcome to Arizona. This is a major day for us. Every year we try to guess the first day that it will hit 100 degrees. You are so fortunate to be sitting inside on the first day that it hits 100 degrees. Somebody's clapping. What, that it's 100 or that you're sitting inside? No, actually, for those of you out of state, this is really what a dry heat is about. You'll find out that when you walk outside, it's 95, 96, and trust me, just go with this, okay? You'll find that 96, 98 in May or June here is very different than where it might be from where you're at. From, like, for example, I spent the summer and fall in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and about died when it hit 85. So welcome to our first 100-degree day. We have no parties or anything. There are no gifts. It's just you can say, I was there, okay? Today we're going to talk about something which is actually, believe it or not, relatively new. I was mayor of Mesa from 2008 to 2014 and was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors of 2013 and 14. And during that time frame, I saw a change in how mayors really interacted and how cities became involved in things such as education, career opportunity, career and college readiness. Things that normally, for most of this country, are not under the purview of the cities or the mayors. As a matter of fact, well over 90% of the cities in the country, the cities are not involved or do not have a direct or indirect leadership role in the education, and yet mayors are becoming more and more involved and cities are becoming more and more involved. And I'd like to start with Neil Giuliano. Neil was the mayor of Tempe for 10 years, from 1994 to 2004, 10 years. And we were talking before about how things had changed from when he was mayor in the 90s, and a very, very accomplished mayor, did a lot of things, great things for his community. Now he's involved as president and CEO of Greater Phoenix Leadership, which is very much involved in these issues. So Neil, talk to me about how the world has changed. How, from when you were mayor of a city with a university to now, how has the city's interest in, involvement in the kind of issues we're talking today, how has that changed?
Thank you, Scott, and thanks to the organizers. I want to thank and acknowledge Jim Zaharis from Greater Phoenix Leadership, Doug Pruitt, and many others of our Greater Phoenix Leadership folks who've been involved with these issues for a long, long time and partnering with the folks in Arizona to ensure that we're doing the right thing and empowering and emboldening these programs a bit more. So I would say one of the biggest differences that I've seen from mid-90s until now is just the level of engagement that people on a municipal level have to have with education in their community. You know, back in the day, it was very easy to say, well, the educational issues are the school board's problem, and the educational issues will be taken care of by the folks for whom that's their primary focus. Cities have to worry about a whole lot of other things, from public safety to water and transportation and so forth. All of our issues, and I think our society has gotten so much more complex, or if it's not actually more complex, there's a heightened awareness about the complexity that I don't think existed before. More than ever, I think we understand and recognize that all of these issues are related to other issues. There are very, very few major policy issues that stand entirely on their own and don't impact other issues. And that's become more obvious to me, and I think when that happens, a city now has a much more focused responsibility to care about young people in the community and care about career pathways for people in the community and the relationships between those students. And they then impact everything on the lexicon, right? They impact what's going on in your parks, they impact what's going on on your streets, they impact what's going on in the late afternoon and into the evening. So all of the different issues are going to be impacted by populations of people that need more attention and need to be more focused. So in general, I would say the awareness is much, much greater than it was, and it's no longer easy to or acceptable to sort of say, well, those are those other folks' issues, and we don't have to worry about those. The fact is, you do have to worry about them, and you don't worry about them at your own peril if you're running a city, in my case, a city of 170,000 people, with a major university and schools and community things going on all the time. You have to worry about all of those. So,
thanks. Paul, you are involved in an effort that basically plays out or shows the action point of what Neil was talking about. As the director of the Mayor's Education Roundtable, something that was formed, going on about 4 or 5 years now?
4 years ago.
And I was fortunate to be one of the founding mayors in that. Why did mayors feel the need to get actively involved in this discussion? And how much does the dysfunction generally in government above the city level impact the mayor's feeling of responsibility or desire to be involved in this subject?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. And I just want to say to Bill Simons, thank you for bringing this work to Arizona. It is much needed. I know this is more than just Arizona, but having you based here is a big deal for us. Bill, thanks. So, Scott, let me answer the question by talking about what the Mayor's Roundtable is, why it was formed, and what it's doing. And I think that'll get to the point. And it was in about 2012 when then candidate, now Mayor Greg Stanton of Phoenix, called during his campaign. And we were talking about what he could do, or what any mayor of a city could do to help education in his city. And Mayor Stanton said, look, I don't want to take over the schools in Phoenix. I don't know any mayor in Arizona that wants to take over their schools. We're going to have plenty to do running those cities. But some of us really care about education, and we feel it's a collective responsibility of mayors, at least I do, as Mayor Stanton said, to help in education in ways that I can. So once he was elected, Mayor Stanton reached out to some other like-minded mayors. Mayor Smith is an example, 10 mayors around Arizona, carefully selecting them as Republicans and Democrats, large cities, small cities. So it was Mesa, it was Tucson, it was Phoenix, it was Avondale, it was Goodyear, it was Gilbert, Oro Valley in Tucson, in the Tucson area. And they all said, yeah, count me in. I'd love to be part of something that's called a roundtable. So that's how it was formed up. And we've got to figure out what to do. So when we began meeting, the mayors all were beginning to share their interest in helping. and being a nonpartisan voice for education. So the roundtable is a nonpartisan activity. We began to meet 3 or 4 times a year, and what the pattern began to be was they wanted to know more about education policy in Arizona. What is it we need to know, and where can we make an impact? So we began to zero in on that. The other thing that happened was that the mayors had an opportunity around that table to begin talking about education in their communities. What were the tensions? Where is it that they could make a difference? And what were they currently doing? And some of the mayors very honestly said, we're not doing much in our town or city. I give out certificates at graduation, and I need to do more than that, but I want to find out what it is I could do to make a difference. So pretty quickly, the mayors said, you know, one of the things that we all have in common, we're all concerned about, is that there are too many kids not finishing high school. There are too many kids dropping out. One of the mayors, it wasn't Mayor Smith, but it was another mayor, said, you know, and they're dropping out of those schools, but they're dropping out into my city. And we have got to do something about that. So the mayors collectively said, let's begin to focus as collective work on improving the graduation rate. Their theory was, if the kids don't even graduate from high school, their opportunities to do anything after that, college, career, certification, community college, 4-year and beyond, are so limited, they're zero. So let's see what we can do collectively to do that. So that was began our work. The mayors asked West Ed and asked me to come up with some ways they could talk to their communities about this. So we engaged the work of Russ Rumberger at UC Santa Barbara, whose life's work has been about dropout work, what it is, what causes it, how to mitigate the problem. And Russ began to pull statistics about the number of dropouts in each of these cities. The other thing he looked at, Scott, was the number of students who were doing nothing, the disconnected youth. Those students between 16 and 24 who were neither in school nor were they working. So we had 2 populations, a bit of an overlap between the two. And so we presented those numbers and said, here's what's happening in your city. And we looked at first at one cohort, the graduating class of 2014, as the data we had. The mayors then asked us, say, what's happening to these kids economically? What's the cost of this? So we then went back to an economist at Columbia University, Clive Belfield, who works with Hank Levin, and they had a really good model to gauge the economic impact of dropouts and disconnected youth. So they worked those numbers out, and we presented them to the mayors at one of our roundtable meetings. It just froze the room. The mayors couldn't believe the numbers. And I remember Professor Rumberger saying, we're pretty certain this is what the economic impact is. Just to be sure, what if we're half wrong? So divide the number by half. Let's say half the kids go on and get a high school diploma and go on into other things. Even half of those numbers were astounding to the mayors. But it gave the mayors a way to talk to their communities about the cost to their cities and to the state of Arizona for both dropouts and disconnected youth. For example, and I'm going to ask you there's a report online, if you go to www.azmayors.org, azmayors.org, you'll see this report on the home page. And it is a dashboard for each of the cities. For the city of Phoenix, for example, in the cohort of 2014, and this is repeating, remember, this just isn't one time, they had about 3,070 dropouts. Collectively, that group, over a lifetime, had a $1.4 billion economic loss for the city and the state. $1.4 billion collected over a lifetime, and it repeats. So the professor said, divide it by half. Half the kids went back and got something. But you still got an astounding economic loss. In Phoenix, they have a disconnected or an opportunity youth rate of 24%. 24% of the kids in the cohort of 2014 were neither working nor in school. 24%. And their lifetime economic losses were in excess of $34 billion to the state. What is that economic loss? It's reduced wages because you don't have a diploma. It's reduced taxes because you're making less money. It's the cost of social services because they need more of them. It's the cost of the criminal justice system because a lot of the kids are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. So that was the point where the mayor said, now we know what we have to work on, because our community, this gives us a voice to our business community and to the people that care about this. So that, Scott, that's become our work, and that's the focus of this roundtable of things that we can do to mitigate this problem.
Thanks. Mayor Evans. And now I want to fill in a little bit about Mayor Evans' bio. He grew up in Yuma, down in the southwestern corner of the state, and is a great story, growing from migrant farm worker, working the fields, to actually ending up running one of the largest family farming and agriculture enterprises in the United States. He's a well-known expert, has testified before state legislature and Congress many, many times, and basically retired, although that's sort of not a good word.
For the fifth time.
For the fifth time, to Payson, which is about 50, 60 miles north of here up in the Pines. They will not hit 100 degrees today. But we've heard Neil talk about how all these different impacts and programs start to melt together. And that's how cities sort of were forced into this issue. It's life, it's reality. We heard from Paul about how mayors have taken an interest, even though they don't run the school districts. Talk to us a little bit on a couple things. Number one, why are mayors and cities well positioned to really be the voice of change, to drive things? One thing that is sure, that in education and all these things, there is not a lack of think tanks, special interest organizations. There's, sometimes I think we sort of collapse under our own weight of all the different hands that are in the fingers that are in the pie. Why is it that mayors and cities can have this unique voice? And why is that especially important in a community such as yours, which is a rural community? And how can you impact your citizens and bring all this together to help make change?
Interestingly enough, going from being a migrant farm worker to a farm operator to a mayor, one of the things that I observed was that, as you've pointed out, we have lots of people involved in this process, but as I became the mayor, one of the things that I became deeply involved in was economic development. And I did so in large part because the first two questions businesses who are trying to relocate to Arizona, and specifically to Payson, ask is, number one, what's your school system like? And number two, what's your hospital or what's your health care like? So from my perspective, my background in education and as a teacher and at the high school and community college level led me to believe that something was broken, something was wrong. And so we got deeply involved in the process. We did a higher education needs assessment that included virtually every school district in rural Arizona. And although statistics are quoted, and we'll hear more of them, I'm sure, before this panel's over, what we found was that 17% of, if you're in rural Arizona, your odds as a high school student graduating from high school and going on to college were only 17% of what you would have if you were in one of the urban or suburban areas. Worse, only 1 in 10 of those, or 1.7%, were actually graduating from college. 1 in 50, gentlemen, that's not the kids, that's not the high school. The system's broken. And so we started looking at individual cases, and although statistics are important, a couple of them. Number one, Bubba, 4th generation in rural Arizona, who had basically dropped out of high school, continued to work in his, in his menial labor business. Number two, David Meredith. The newspaper yesterday pointed out that Mr. Meredith is now incarcerated in Arizona's prison system. He'll be there for the next 7 years at $60,000 a year. So we'll spend $500,000 on David Meredith because there's something broken in the system. Bubba, 4th generation, no hope, no chance of going up. And yet somebody took an interest in him as a freshman in high school, took him under wing, inspired him, to reach beyond what his family background and what his experience and what his real opportunities in life were. He graduated from college. He's now going to contribute $1 million a year in his chosen profession in rural Arizona. $500,000 to take care of somebody who went through the system that was broken, or $1 million in contributions by somebody that was whose issues in life were dealt with. I believe, as the mayor, one of the things I've observed in terms of economic development is that it's not how fat somebody's wallet is, it's not what's in their wallet, it's what's between their ears that will decide the outcome of my community, this state, and perhaps this nation. And we need to start working on that. We need to start recognizing that the schools can't do it, the city government can't do it, the state government can't do it. We have to work together collaboratively. 8 decades ago, the greatest generation faced a crisis, and they rose up and dealt with it. Roughly 30 years ago, we had another great crisis, and we rose up and we dealt with it. John Kennedy challenged this nation to reach the moon, and we did it. We face a challenge that is far more reaching in terms of its impact on our future as a society than did they and their generation. And it's going to require that same kind of mutual commitment and concentration of effort on the part of all of us if we're going to overcome it. I would hope that this group would understand that workplace and education have to be, as we move forward, have to be brought together. We have to understand that the goal of education is not knowledge. We have more knowledge in this little tiny object than most of us had access to when we were in college. And yet, we continue to struggle as a nation. And so unless we can put these players together and understand that we've got to inspire a new generation to reach for the stars, we're going to be stuck in another Ferguson, another Katrina, another Watts. And so I hope you understand the urgency of what we're doing as mayors in terms of saying we've got to bring an umbrella where all the players who can influence this outcome can come together and muster the resources to make this happen.
Thank you, Mayor. And I think you just heard what a mayor and a bully pulpit, what they can do to inspire. And by the way, I have confirmed that what he said was true, that there is more knowledge in this. I Googled it while he was saying it. It is, and Wikipedia told me it was true. So, Sarah, now you have a unique viewpoint of this because you, as self-described, have been on both sides of this. Now with the Ogden schools, and one who's been a teacher, a principal, now who leads the effort in career and college readiness. You came from a very different background. You've experienced institutions coming together to help somebody. Tell us a little bit about why you think it's possible that we can make a difference, and especially with cities and everybody working together. And Ogden is a great example of how that has happened.
Ogden is an incredibly powerful example, and I have had the opportunity to be part of Ogden City in northern Utah and Ogden City School District for more than 20 years and have watched an evolution, the likes of which I had not anticipated, coming myself, as you said, sort of from the other side. I am able to speak to policymakers and my colleagues about the reality that it was a kindergarten teacher who told me that there would be a possibility for life other than what I had, the day-to-day opportunity in which to interact and engage and observe. So as a kindergartner, somebody said to me, "You could get a scholarship." Now, I had no idea what a scholarship was. Nobody in my household had attended college. Nobody in my household had a salaried position. And all I knew was what I saw on soap operas and in my kindergarten class, and there were no scholarships in either. But as I decided to go back and talk to my mother about what that meant, my mother had the aha that maybe there could be something different as well. My mother, who sold Avon as her profession at the time, had this huge excitement at the fact that somebody had told her daughter in inner city Portland, Oregon, who came from a home where nobody had graduated from college, let alone enrolled in college, that she could get a scholarship to college. Now, I share that because it wasn't as easy for my siblings. I am the only one of my mother's children who graduated from high school on a traditional path. My sisters did later go back and get their diplomas, but for quite some time, they were those dropout statistics. They were those who were not gainfully employed and were not in school. And have had to ask myself, because of that, for the last 40 some odd years, and in particular the last 26 raising my own child, what made the difference? Why was I able to say I could go on to college? And I have to attribute it to my kindergarten teacher. That said, it was a very different time. The last 20 years in Ogden City, we have had a huge change in our demographics and a huge shift in what our community is and who would want to engage in conversations about education. I do not have students who have the kinds of aspirations that I had. When I meet with them, nobody thinks I need to get out and go to college and graduate. In particular, working in the alternative high school and as a high school principal, not a single child said to me that they wanted to go to college, that they wanted to get a trade, that they wanted to do something after high school. And after a lot of soul searching, realized a lot of that was because we had been making an economic argument. We had been telling them their few years in high school that if you get out, you can earn this much money, you can do this, you can provide for your family. But they felt that they were doing fine. All they knew is what they had seen. They were in small pockets in this little community where, like me, they would go home after school and they had chores and siblings to care for and chaos and would go to bed exhausted. And that was all they knew. They didn't see that there could be something to which to aspire, and that aspiring does not mean turning your back on. That an aspirational ideation of success could be a collective venture. And entering that dialogue then and starting our conversations with policymakers who were saying to us, even 20 years ago, what are we going to do about this demographic problem? I was compelled to say, as many of my colleagues were, and many of our policymakers increasingly, our demographics are not a problem. Our demographics are people. Our problem is getting everybody at the table to say, what are our kids experiencing every day? What are they seeing? What are they being told is possible? Not everybody's lucky enough to have a kindergarten teacher say that you can go to college, let alone decide to think about that every year of their lives. But our teachers are engaging in the community. And the more we bring our teachers to the table and show them what is possible and what students can aspire to, the more opportunity can be conveyed to our students. We now, in Ogden City, the city ranked 10th nationwide in brain gains. The number and percent graduating from college, a 5.5% increase just in the last 10 years. A city with nominal income gap, ranked number 1, and a city in which we were just featured on CNBC for repairing blight, have a unique opportunity situated in a relatively small community where teachers are sitting in what we call professional learning communities with the mayor, with policymakers, with industry. Industry has just recently come to the table and brought a really exciting opportunity where for the first year ever, we will now have what we are calling externships. And I know that we are not the first people to have thought of this, But the fact that we will have over this summer a handful of selected teachers, elementary and secondary, working in business to learn about business so that they can touch 180 plus youth each day, as opposed to the internship that would just give one student the benefit to experience work-based learning. Our teachers will learn what is possible. It's different. We didn't have cell phones when I started teaching. We were super excited if we had an overhead projector, and that was called technology. Right. An overhead projector with your plastic overlays. It was so fancy to have colored pens.
And how
on
many
those.
of you have not done a dog in the overhead projector? Come on, admit it. It was
Right,
great, wasn't it? The kids today just don't get to experience that.
They miss out on that. they can see pictures right in front of them, but I had to draw them on a whiteboard or a blackboard or an overhead. And the reality is our teachers don't know what careers are out there.
Yeah.
Many of our teachers, until we started this partnership, which has really taken off the last 16 years and in particular the last 5, didn't know that we were a hub for advanced industry. Didn't know that our students had right within their reach aerospace
So they didn't know
experts.
where to direct students because they didn't know what the destination would be.
Absolutely. They still, in kindergarten all the way through secondary, were having conversations about, do you want to
What's
be a
possible?
doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a teacher? Narrowing that set of options. And as somebody whose son almost didn't graduate, but for the Applied Technical College, I'm very supportive of our teachers being aware of what is out there. And it's been wonderful to be part of a city where the mayor approached us about how can I help you? Our legislators approached us about how they could help us. And now we're all sitting down monthly and dialoguing all together as a learning community. How do we provide that aspirational ideation from kindergarten on up, and for every student provide a 4-year plan every year so that they are preparing for what they decide their future will be.
Great. Neil, Sarah talked about how a community has come together, what you've talked about, all the aspects, and leadership from the mayor, especially you mentioned the mayor bringing, as a convener, and the city government as a convener, to bring these parties together. You're now in a position where it's all about leadership. And in a world of hyper-partisanship and ideological divides, and let's face it, although we'd like to think education is not political, it is purely political. Just look at the debate over Common Core, things like that, where people are trying to do something and all of a sudden they become political. In that environment, and with so many different groups, and as someone now who works for a leadership and directs a leadership, what's the challenge of bringing people together in an issue and sort of working within the political realities, but having people focus on the real issue and bringing real change? What's the challenges you see?
I think the biggest challenge is having the courage to challenge.
Okay.
And the biggest challenge is speaking truth to power, because that's hard for people to do. But the biggest challenge is asking people to defend their views when they are unwilling to compromise and unwilling to look at bigger pictures. And it's hard in a political environment because there are always potential retributions in the political world. There are deals made, and if you want to be a player and if you want to be involved, you've got to sort of go along. So I actually believe we need to start asking people not so much about what their view is on a certain issue, but we need to ask them how open, when we're deciding who we're going to support and so forth, we need to ask them how open are they to work with others? How open are they to show up to a room not with their own solution, but to find a solution that everyone can agree on and move forward on? You know, I think those of us who are had to serve as mayors on a local level with city council members who are often very different, maybe from different parts of the community, but every single week to get your vision accomplished as a mayor, you've got to find, in my case, it was 3 other votes, right? 3 other people. The magic number in my life for years was 3. And every single Thursday for 10 years, I had to have 3 people agree with me on what we were voting on and what we were doing that week, so that with my vote it was 4 and we could move the city forward. And every week, on one issue or another, it was a different 3. Which means you have to approach people with an open mind. You have to approach people by listening first and finding out what's important to them, and then saying, let's come together and find a solution that we can all agree with. There's just not a lot of that anymore. We are now electing folks from the extremes on one end or the other end who work for that extreme. And I had a legislator recently tell me, we were saying, well, we're going to be putting this meeting together on this topic, and we'd love for you to be there, to be engaged and participate. Well, I'm against that. Well, I know, but it would be great to have you there and have you participate and listen, learn. Well, no, I'm against that. Well, we're not going to get anywhere if we have a majority of folks who only believe they were elected for their view and to hold their view and to never move off of their view, and that's how you get gridlock, and that's how you get nothing accomplished. And I think we're all tired of that. I think you only have to look at what's going on nationally to realize that we're all tired of that.
Well, here it even gets worse, because I've been told that I won't go to that meeting because if I'm seen in the same room with that person, that will be used against me.
Yeah, sure.
And that's how sad it is. Well, Mayor Evans, let me ask you this. That would seem to be an opportunity now for mayors and cities who are, as we've stated, are nonpartisan elections in most of the U.S. And as Neil said, the process in cities really is a problem-driven process as opposed to an ideological-driven process, which it is at the legislature and Congress. How do you see the role of cities, and this is an opportunity for cities to really be used, and for those in education, for looking for this, cities to play a lead role because of their unique political stature? How do you see that as an opportunity for mayors and the cities as a whole really taking a lead in these issues?
I think a couple of things. Number one, I'd love to be able to say that we're non-political, but as my colleague just mentioned, you can say it all day long, but you're perceived as being political one way or the other. So I think what we need to do is be a little more honest with one another. We have people out here in this society now who seem to think that compromise is a 4-letter word. Maybe they need to go back to school. This nation was formed. It wasn't formed by the Tea Party. It was formed by compromise. If we hadn't have had those amendments, 10 of them, we call the Bill of Rights, adopted, we would have never had a constitution. We'd have never had a nation. And somehow we've got to get over this idea that single-issue politics is the only way to do things. So at my level, I can suggest that you can do that. It is possible to do that, to use the formula that the mayor just mentioned, and that is to start with the commonality, the things that we want, and leave the things that we disagree on to the periphery. We were able to, in my town, I know Sarah talks about Ogden being small, but my town is a town of 16,000 people. We were able to raise $100 million for our education initiative. Wow. $100 million with a town of 16,000. You don't do that without building coalitions. You don't do that by focusing on our differences. You do that by talking about your common interest in the welfare of your community, the welfare of society, the good of the youth that are coming up. And you can do it. It's tough. It really is tough. It's not fun, as the mayor said, to sit in a room with people who like to draw lines and say, I'm not going to cross that line. It's not just a political thing, as you point out. They don't even want to be seen with the quote-unquote opposition. So I think the way to do that is to rephrase the question. And when you rephrase that question and get everybody focusing on a solution, an answer to a common question, then you can move forward.
Thank you. Paul, we just have a couple minutes left, so very quickly, you're involved with a group that you believe can make a difference. Mm-hmm. Why do you think mayors and cities are well positioned, and how can this audience better use those elected leaders to make a difference in this?
That's a great question, Scott. Let me come back to the point to answer that. that the two mayors have just made, and that's the importance of finding common ground. I think that's what mayors are doing. When this group of 10 mayors at the roundtable first met, now 16 mayors, they wanted to know what they could do together. And I mean, the theory of action was very simple, that here's what a school district does, here's what a mayor does in his or her role, and there is a place where those two circles intersect. And that's what we can do together. So I've been privileged to work with this group of mayors for 4 years. What I've learned from them and what they're learning from each other is the power of collective impact. Just exactly the point that was made, that when we set aside our differences, there's more that unites us than divides us. I think I heard that on a political speech the other night, as a matter of fact. But it's true. And these mayors, small town, big cities, R's and D's, are saying, you know what, education is what unites us. And this idea of collective impact, things we can do together and agree to, is a very, very powerful thing. And I think the mayors have taken that out from the roundtable individually to their cities. They've taken it out collectively as a voice for education. And it's in a time that was just described of partisanship and arguing about everything in extreme positions. These mayors have become kind of a central voice to say, at the end of the day, we have got to improve the numbers in these reports. We've got to give more kids a chance to do it. We have a role to play. We're going to take that initiative, we're going to play that role, and we're going to do it in the right way.
And we have a bully pulpit. Sarah, in 90 seconds, wrap it up with a positive note as to why this is important. Why is this an effort that's worthwhile for all of us?
I really think the case has already been made by those who really know how to use the bully pulpit and speak to the inspiration that I think we all have here in terms of going out and improving and strengthening the core of our communities, which starts with our current students who will soon be graduates and then in the employment sector and then leadership. I do think, though, that we need to move beyond, and I'm thrilled to be part of a community that is moving beyond just collaborative communication to that collective impact level where teachers are going into industry and government to see what the world that they live in is like on the other side, so to speak, of our conversations, and government and industry are coming into our schools, leading extended day programming and sharing with students and families what is possible so that that shared language and understanding comes to everybody's forefront. It does go without saying, but I sat through a session yesterday talking about meaningful work, and in education, that's a behavior intervention for a child who needs a remediation for inability to sit through class appropriately. So we have to have those conversations and understand meaningful work in terms of meaningful community effort.
Thank you. I think that if there's one message that I'd like to leave with you is that your cities are an opportunity. They are a partner. They're well positioned to take a leadership role, and I think you have leaders at the city level that are willing and want to take a leadership role. In the political spectrum, they're well positioned because of the nature of what cities do. The fact is that nationwide, the acceptance level or the approval level for Congress hovers around 10-11%. The approval rate for state legislatures is about twice that, about 21-22%. The approval rating for most city governments is 65 to 75%. People like their cities. For the most part, they trust their civic leaders. They trust their city leaders. If you have mayors, as you heard, two very articulate and driven mayors here, that are willing to be part of this process, take advantage of it. Call upon your mayors, call upon your city councils, call upon your cities to operate in this area where the circles do intersect, and that is a much bigger area than I think we realize. Use them as a tool, use them as a partner, use them as a leadership role to help drive an agenda which I think, since you're here, we all believe is incredibly important. I'd like to thank our panelists. Please give them a round of applause, if you would. Thank you for all of your efforts and all that you do. And now when you leave this, I hope you have new energy, and let's go just get it done.